Hey there, it's Robin, and you're listening to Healthy Habits for a Healthier Home. I'm here to help you create a healthier life, one simple shift at a time. If you're a mama ready to ditch toxins, clean up your family's nutrition, and build daily habits that support your well-being, you're definitely in the right place. Each episode is packed not only with education, but practical tips and tools to help you transform your health and your home without that feeling of overwhelm. So let's take this journey together to create a thriving, low-tox home for you and your family. If you're ready, say, I am ready. Now let's get into this episode. Hey y'all, today we're going to be diving into something that I know many of us can relate to, that feeling stuck in go mode. That's been something I've been working on for the last couple of years. And, it's that constant push, that striving, the exhaustion that creeps in, even when life looks quote unquote good on the outside. My guest today, Stephanie Nelson, knows that feeling all too well. She's a trauma-informed somatic coach. She's a nervous system practitioner, and she's also the founder of the Stress Healers. Once a self-proclaimed workaholic who couldn't rest without guilt, Stephanie discovered a completely different path, one that helps us tune into our body, not just our mind, and find freedom through felt safety, not being forced. We're talking all about the nervous system today, the beauty of somatic healing, and how you can begin to live a more grounded, peaceful life. So I encourage everybody to stop what they're doing, take a deep breath, grab your tea, and let's drop into this conversation together. I'm super excited, and I can't wait to hear what your takeaways are. As we dive into this conversation with Stephanie, I'm excited because you know that I'm more in the ingredients department when I'm thinking about health and wellness, but Somatics to me is something that I have learned over the last couple of years, but I'm not really good at, but I know that it is life altering for some people. And so I'm super excited to have Stephanie on. She is a trauma-informed coach. She knows somatics. So welcome to the show. Thank you so much for coming on with your experience, your wisdom. I'm super excited to dive into our conversation.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to dive into.
I read your bio. I talked about a little bit of the intro that you're a workaholic. And I want to just say to parents out there, if you're a mom listening and you don't quote unquote go to a corporate office, you're still a workaholic. You can still have tendencies to be a workaholic because your job is 24/7 and there's no escaping it unless your child, goes to school or goes to a friend's house. And still then you're thinking about your child. So how did you get into this work coming from corporate?
Yeah. So I heard this phrase many, many years ago, and it really stuck with me, that your mess becomes your message.
Ooh, I love that.
Yeah. And it's interesting. I also started reading ingredient labels because I was at the age of 12 diagnosed with arthritis, bursitis, and tendonitis in both of my hips.
Wow.
And I could not walk upstairs because my hips were so inflamed at the age of 12. So that's when my healing journey began, and it was mostly personal for decades. And then in 2019, I shifted. I was a conscious travel consultant before. I had studied international business and anthropology. I was so curious about the world and how the world shapes who we are and what our beliefs are, what our behaviors are, which is so tied into somatics. But I was doing that for years. And then in 2019, shifted to offering somatics professionally. But when I was 12 and had this arthritis, this chronic pain, and I was seeing so many different people, from chiropractors to physical therapists. I eventually started seeing ART, which is active release therapy, and I was seeing myofascial release therapists. I changed my diet and nutrition completely at the age of 12. I was reading ingredient labels at the age of 12.
That's awesome. That's amazing.
22 years ago. So it's interesting that you say that, because that is a very important part of health, but also our nervous system, the health and harmony of our nervous system, because our gut is our enteric nervous system. And so the health of our gut is directly affecting the health of our brain and our biology and how we experience the world.
Yeah, for sure. And I love that. First of all, at 12 that you had those diagnoses, but I don't think it's uncommon. I think, we would like to say it is, but I think as we all know right now, the chronic, health conditions have gone crazy with children. And you are correct. Our gut is our second brain. And so it does affect everything. And it's really hard to until you're in a position where you're suffering, it's really hard to recognize what's happening. And then when you are suffering, you still don't recognize. So then you go to these people. And I really love ART. That's something for me, health wise, that has really been a pivotal modality for me. And my chiropractor does it. I call him my woo woo chiropractor because he doesn't do just the traditional, but
Love it. That's the
it's
best.
a way to release emotions. For me, it was that missing link kind of. But back to the ingredients, what people don't necessarily start out knowing until they know, right? Until they're educated, is that everything that is in a food is not regulated. And the more we can understand that, and the more we can become an ingredient detective, the more we can make better choices for ourselves and our families. And so I think at such a young age, learning that for you to be where you are now makes sense, right? Because it's like you started with a challenge, you sought through it, and then you found the somatic, which it is all. So for somebody who doesn't understand somatics yet, maybe this is their first time or maybe they're a newbie, can you give kind of a simple explanation of what that actually is?
Yeah. So somatics or soma means body, but it's not just the physical, mechanical body. It is the living, breathing, dynamic, intelligent, creative body that includes the physical body, but it also includes the mental body, our mind, our thoughts, the emotional body, our mood. It includes our energy and our spirit. It even is planetary, like the planet Earth has a nervous system that is in constant communication with all life, including humans, plants, animals, everything has a frequency, has an energy output, and everything is constantly in communication. So somatics is body-based, and we're widening the definition of body here, body-based methods of healing stress. And I like to say harmonizing our nervous system. I do not use the word regulation, which most people, if you've got your finger in the pulse of nervous system work or somatics, that's what you'll hear is nervous system regulation. But I prefer harmony because regulation is rooted in rules,
Yes,
which
I
is
love
the
that.
root of regulation is reglas or rules and more of an externally imposed
I really,
force
really
of
love that. I
control.
love that word harmony because for most people that, have had any experience just with music or just listening, they can kind of wrap their mind around if your body could be more in harmony with itself, with internally and externally. And I want to hit just really quick on the energy piece because, again, people haven't been taught it. It's not even being aware, it's haven't been taught that everything
Yeah.
has a frequency, everything
Yeah.
has an energy. And so
Yeah.
when we're thinking about getting our nervous system more harmonized,
Yeah.
going back to the food component, it's like when you eat something, what was happening to that animal before you ate it. And so I know that goes kind of deep and beyond, but I just want people to
Mhm.
even just be curious about it. It's like the welfare of
Yeah.
animals does matter because their
Yes.
energy is different when they're not being well taken care of. And then you're basically eating it and you're internalizing some of that energy. So I know it sounds for some people very far fetched, but the more you
Mhm.
learn and the more
Yeah.
comfortable you get with the conversation of it, it makes
Yeah.
sense.
Yeah, and I think it's maybe only far-fetched for people because it's not really talked about in mainstream, but
Yeah,
this is
100%.
100% rooted in science.
Yes,
Is
yes.
that yeah, is that everything has an energetic frequency. We are mostly empty space. Our cells are 99.9% empty space. If you go down the rabbit hole of quantum physics, this is what it will tell you, is that we are mostly empty space and we're vibrating. Everything is emitting different frequencies, and you're so right. The output of everything is so important. So it's if you do eat meat, like regenerative, biodynamic,
Hmm.
Knowing the farmer is absolutely the best way to do it, not only for the animals, but the soil, which impacts climate, which
Yep.
impacts how stressed we feel. Like everything is so connected. So yeah,
Right.
yeah, beautiful.
I
Yeah.
I love that. When you just said quantum physics, I really wish that in high school it was something that you have to take because I think it's so important for us to get to know ourselves better. And I was learning from a lady, and she said she went, and I'm not going to remember the name, but it was in California. She went to this institute, and they basically had a petri dish, and they had cells, and then you could see the cells vibrating based on what was happening in the room. And the way she explained it, I was just like, wow, like that would be so cool to see. And I think, why aren't we showing kids this? Why aren't we showing adults this? Like, let's get this stuff out into the mainstream media so that way people understand. The more we can understand our bodies, the more we can understand ourselves, the healthier we can actually become. And I think that's probably why they don't share it.
Yeah. Yeah, it sounds like something that maybe happened at Esalen Institute. But what people
Sounds
can
familiar.
look up is Dr. Emoto. That's Emoto. I don't know if you've seen his water experiments, but he'll have different water jars and write different things on the glass jar,
Mhm.
and they crystallize in different patterns depending on what was written on the jar. And that's the only difference. And so there's words like love or hate or indifference or God or peace or anger, just all
Interesting.
these different energetic frequencies. And they all have a different physical manifestation based on the energetics. So cool.
That's amazing. I'm definitely going to look that up and I'll put it in the show notes. I'll look up Dr. Emoto and I'll find that study and that video and I'll put it on because I think it's important. Again, I think visuals are important.
Totally.
So I want to swing back around to the somatics because, we did the definition, but I know that some people are more visual or need explanation, like need examples. So
Totally.
let's say you're treating a client, they've come in and they're completely, burned out because they're workaholic in whatever shape that looks like for them. They're not caring for themselves. They have no, self-care, just all of the things. Where do you start with them and what are some somatic practices tangibly that someone could walk away with today if they're feeling like they're in that turned on go state and can't get out of it?
Hmm. Yes. I'm hearing two different avenues we could go. So if it's okay, I'll kind of do a big picture and then zoom
Sounds
into
great.
the more tangible. Okay.
Sounds really good.
So I work with a method that I developed right after my dad passed away very suddenly in 2022. He died 1 month after a cancer diagnosis. And it was such a shock that it really threw me into another level and another layer of healing. And this method came through. So I call it the somatic bliss method.
Oh, good.
And
I
there's
wanted to talk
four,
about that. So, yay. Okay.
yeah. There's four pillars, and they're not linear, but they hold up the experience of somatic bliss. And the first one that we look at is so all four of them are to recognize, to resource, then we have release and resilience. So the four R's. The first one, and again, non-linear, but they do build on each other and we can kind of like swirl in different pillars or energies as we need them. To recognize is to recognize like where we are now. What experiences do we have access to? What emotions do we have access to? What emotions are not easy for us to access? What experiences are not easy for us to access? Because we're always practicing something. And for a very long time, I was practicing, working 16-hour days and very anxious and, scattered. I had an ADHD diagnosis and I haven't been on medication for I've since been off medication for 6 years, but we're always practicing something. So recognizing what are we practicing and what do we want to be in practice of? And then starting to map all of the different parts. So I do IFS, internal family systems parts work is one of the somatic modalities that I work with because somatic bliss method is an integrative modality. So the first is recognizing all of the complexities, all of the desires and the longings and our values, everything that anchors us, everything that's important to us, like what we care about, because we're only stressed out by what we care about. So when we start to understand like what we care about, we have a better roadmap to what's worth my time, energy, and attention, and what's not worth my time, energy, and attention. And when things do come in that stress us out, we can reorient ourselves to like, this is like, but I actually really care about this. So yes, this is hard. Yes, this is challenging, but I really care about this. So I'm going to rise and meet this occasion rather than being combative or collapsing under the pressure of a stressor. So this is recognized. Then we resource. Resourcing is how we resource our nervous system to feel safe enough, because we cannot heal physically or non-physically if our nervous system is in a constant state of survival. If we feel threatened, we are expending all of our resources, all of our the mitochondria, the energy, all of the neurotransmitters are all for the sake of survival and not for thriving, not for change in the way that we want to change. So I have a membership that offers practices to resource your nervous system, that these practices are on average about 10 minutes, because they're meant to continually bring your nervous system back to a place of harmony, back to, if we use polyvagal language, that ventral vagal, where we are feeling safe and connected and creative and capable and playful and alive and fulfilled. So how do we keep bringing ourselves back? Because the goal of nervous system work, of somatics, is not to be calm all the time, but the goal is to be flexible. How do we meet the moment with the right energy, right? So if we're playing with our kids, we don't want to be like shut down and exhausted and like on the couch, right? We want to meet them in playfulness with energy and aliveness. But 20 minutes before bedtime, we don't want the anxiety spirals to, that mental checklist of all the things to do and just like go, 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 right? We want to meet the moment. So that's resource. And then we release stored survival stress. And when we experience stressors, if they don't move through, if we don't create the conditions for them to complete their natural cycle, because stress is a physiological response, it's not a conscious decision, right? Our body is responding to something, reacting to something. And so all of the physiology changes. And what happens so often is we just shut it down.
Yeah.
So in the release phase, we support completing that energetic cycle so that we can let that stressor of the past go. And then the resilience piece is, how do we build our resilience to new stressors? Because they are not going to stop, right? Life is going to continually throw us challenges. And this pillar is about what Dan Siegel would say, widening the window of tolerance. And Kai-Ching Tom, another teacher that I have, is widening the window of transformation. So we're not just tolerating stress, but we're able to transform how we show up under pressure. So that's kind of the big
I want to
picture.
pause for 1 second because
Yeah.
I mean, those are all amazing and they make chronologically, like make logical sense. But one of the things with the window of tolerance, or as the other guy said, transformation, what I think that is for a lot of people is when after you learn how to process an emotion completely through the cycle and out, the more you do those things from past things that you kind of suppressed and kept, the better you get at those tools, right? And so then what makes the window open a little bit is because when you come up against something, you're now capable to recognize it faster. And then you have kind of a tool belt of tools to use in order to not get stuck and suppress. So what I want people to take away from this and from the pillars is there are strategic things to do, and you're not just doing it to be done. You're doing it because you're building your tool belt. You're doing it because you are preparing yourself to meet those new stressors with being better prepared, basically. So that is something that I think is beautiful, because a life without stress is not a life, right? I mean, you can't expect that you're never going to be triggered. You're never, and you could even potentially be triggered back to an old thing. But it is about recognizing it faster, moving through it quicker, because an emotion can only last 90 seconds if you actually let it come completely through and deal with it.
Yeah.
So what I've learned about myself is that before I knew some of those things, when a feeling came up, instead of letting it fully ride out for those quote unquote 90 seconds, I would cut it
Yeah.
off, right? And I would be like, I don't have time for this. Like, you'll have to sit back, you know? And so
Yeah.
those are things when people are like, what does it mean to have a suppressed, emotion? It's an emotion
Mhm.
that wasn't allowed to be fully go through the spectrum, basically that 90 seconds of like coming through. And it doesn't mean that you don't cry. It means you have all the emotions, you see it, you recognize it, but the suppression part comes when you don't allow for it to fully happen. Is that correct? That's what I've learned.
Absolutely. Yep.
Okay.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Um, so when we're talking about like high achieving women in corporate, high achieving moms at home, there's a lot of similarities, right? Because they're just burning kind of the candle at both ends. And so it's not something that we shouldn't expect that's happening to us, because without the tools, we are going to find ourselves in this place. So for moms out there that are listening, this is permission, right? It's permission to get in touch with some of those things. It's permission to know that you're worth doing some of this work. And I think that the four pillars is really, for me, concrete and visual. And I like that. So thank you for creating that. I'm glad that came to you during your time. And, it was during a time. And that was another thing. It's like during a time of sadness, during a time of stress, we get clarity sometimes. And that's that dark and light. So it's not expecting everything to be roses all the time. We are going to come up on challenges every single day, but it's what do you do with those challenges?
Absolutely. And you named this so beautifully earlier is that there is no life without stress. And it's true. There's really no, and I'll even add a word, there's no meaningful life
Mm,
without stress because every experience that requires us to grow and challenge ourselves to be a better version of ourselves, to grow, to expand, to elevate, to step into your potential, that moment also is stressful. It
right.
asks you to rise, it asks you to expand. So absolutely, I totally agree. There's no meaningful life without stress. And so this is one of the issues I have. So many people come to me as clients and they're like, oh, my doctor told me I needed to reduce stress. I'm like, I hate okay, bless their heart. And we need a reframe because we're trying to reduce stress is a losing game. One, you cannot control what the world throws at you. So trying to reduce the stressors that get presented in front of you is impossible. And so you'll only feel like a failure when you're like, why does hard stuff keep happening? And two is that there is no meaningful life without stress. So the goal isn't to be reducing stress, but how do I transform the way that I show up so that when I do face a pressure or challenge or stressor, that I am really proud of the way that I handled it.
Hmm. I like that. And I like that reframe because, you know,
Yeah.
reducing stress is kind of one of those haphazard things
Mm.
that a doctor could throw at you just because they don't
Yeah.
know. Right. And I feel like
Yeah.
it's kind of like
Yeah.
you need to go on a diet. It's like, well, what does that mean? It's a lot of these things they haven't learned. So it's not, in their defense, they have not been taught
Yeah.
these things. So they just
Mhm.
generally, generalize something and say it. But
Yeah.
it's not helpful. Let's be honest,
Right.
like go on a diet.
Yeah.
What does that mean? Reduce stress. What
Totally.
is now you can minimize some of the stress that will be presented to you by having boundaries or
Hmm.
by taking time
Hmm.
for yourself and setting your morning up differently. Like you do have
Totally.
control in some of those ways. But you're right. You're going to be presented every day with something
Yeah.
by someone, whether you invite it in or not, but you can minimize who you invite in or what gets invited in. But there are some things you have no control over because that's just the world. If you're seeing something
Right.
on social media over and over and over and it's triggering you, get off of social media. That is something you
Right.
can control. And I think we're in a doomed society right now where we just we're addicted to that social media aspect. We're addicted to seeing content, and our brains are not really wired for that. That consistently all day long. My dad would come home and watch like the 5 o'clock news when I was growing up, or whatever, 6 o'clock, whatever it was, for 1 hour, and then it got turned off. Maybe he read the paper in the morning, but it wasn't that constant infiltration of somebody's opinion all the time. So I think
Right.
that's hard.
Yeah. It absolutely is. The amount of information that is just being thrown at us all the time is another stressor, because it's information for the brain, body, nervous system to sift through. And then so much of that is negative, because there's a
Mm.
phrase, but something like blood cells. It's like a very old, like
Hmm.
100-year-old newspaper slogan. But really, the bad stuff sells. And so they prey on people and our nervous systems that are wired for negativity. It's called the negativity bias.
Mm.
And there's a phrase that and negative experiences in news is like Velcro, and then good stuff is like Teflon. It just slips right off. And this is evolutionary, very beneficial, because, for example, you are walking through the fields and you spot something that could either be a rock or a tiger. If it's a rock and you think it's a tiger and you prepare yourself, you hide or you get really big and loud and scare it away, you would survive. If you thought it was a rock, you thought it was the good thing, but it was the bad thing, it was the danger, it was the tiger, and it ate you, very, bad, very bad. So we are
Right.
wired, it's called the negativity bias. We're wired for negativity. So it is hard. It's definitely a challenging time that we're living in, with so much. We were never meant to be exposed to this much violence on
Hmm.
the news, on
Hmm.
our phones. And our nervous systems can't tell the difference between what's real and imagined. And the stuff that's happening
Yes.
is real. We're seeing it.
Hmm.
So it's as if the nervous system is happening to you.
Yes. Very good point.
So we're just getting bombarded all day, every day. So there's never been a more important time to not reduce stress, but what I say, to heal stress, to heal our relationship to stress. And those things that you named earlier about setting boundaries or having a morning routine, those would be resilience building activities.
Right.
And so how do we heal our relationship to the inevitable stressors that are going to be presented to us, rather than just trying to reduce it?
Right. Very, very true. I heard some statistic that it was, and this to me was kind of an eye opener that I think we should be saying over and over again. But what you see, 80% of what you see on social media is 10% of what is truth. And like what, not just is truth, but it's 80% of what we see is 10% of what the majority of people believe or put out there, or
Mhm.
but we're just seeing it because of algorithms. We're seeing it because of the way social media is set up. And the other thing that
Yeah.
was said was, everybody like on your street, let's for example, we don't know our neighbors. I mean, I have a great street and I do know my neighbors, but there's a lot of people that don't know their neighbors. But
Yeah.
if we talk to our neighbors, even if we had differences of opinions or differences of how we take care of ourselves or whatever, we all have the same common goal, which is to be our healthiest, to live our longest, to be happy. Like we have like certain common goals, but instead of talking to our neighbors, instead of being in community with our neighbors, we're in community with this, and
Yeah.
which is the phone and the device, and like getting sucked in and seeing. And so and you're right, it's just not healthy for our body, and our nervous system is really taking the brunt of it. And I think that's why we see so many people grappling and needing some of these somatic skills and things to help heal themselves. So if someone's listening and they're like, man, I think this is me, I feel disconnected from my body. And the other thing about somatics that
Mm.
we're all we were taught to go to talk therapy, right? We're taught to, you know,
Yeah.
express ourselves, but somatics and other modalities is really about getting in tune from the neck down, right? It's understanding. Can you explain that a little bit?
Yeah. So as we mentioned with somatics as being this wider definition of a body, the body includes the brain. So it
Mm-hmm.
includes talking, it includes expressing our thoughts and our perspectives and our experiences. So we don't exclude talking from somatic practice or somatic coaching. but we really do begin to develop a skill set of being in relationship with the body. So when we're thinking about either the brain, we have the triune brain, which is a very simplistic model of our brain, but it's helpful for understanding that we live as adults mostly in, or try to live in, the prefrontal cortex or the neocortex, so the newest evolutionary part of our brain. And that's like the squiggly bit that when you picture a brain, like that's what you picture is actually the neocortex. And this is responsible for logic and reason and speaking. Underneath that, we have the limbic system, which is primarily responsible for emotions and memory. And then underneath that is the most ancient part of the brain. And it's also the first. So this models in the collective, but it also models as an individual. So the first one is the brain stem, and that is like everything that you're born knowing how to do. It's the sleeping and the breathing and the eating and the digestion and all of those things. And it's the first language that we learn right out of the gate. When we're babies, we communicate through touch. Like we know when we're cold or when we're hungry or when we're wet. Those things, those sensorial things, the sensations are the first way that we communicate our needs and relationship to caregivers. First language, sensation. Second language, emotion. When we're 2, 3, 4, we have emotions that we can't quite talk through. We can't have a rational conversation about emotions. We maybe can label them, we can identify them, but they're really more felt sensationally. And then there's the complexity of the emotion that's on top of it. That's the second language. Then the third language is verbal language. So whether it's English or French or Spanish. But then as we begin to speak, we forget the first two languages, but they're imperative for our safety and survival. So somatics helps us bridge all three languages, especially because when we're overwhelmed by stress, the prefrontal cortex is not working very well. So we're working against biology when we're trying to heal stress or trauma just by talking, just by this one verbal language, and ignoring the two instinctual primal languages that are actually overactive and dying to be communicated with. We completely ignore those, totally working against biology. So somatics is bridging all three of those languages so that we have a better understanding of the body and our needs and how we can feel safe enough, as I mentioned earlier, to do any healing our nervous system has to be and feel safe enough to heal.
Very interesting. And I love that explanation. It's one that I have not heard put in that way, but really kind of brings it all together. And I'm fascinated by, the verbal taking over the emotional and the sensation, but it is 100% true. But we do forget, again, we forget about certain things in our biology because it's never really referred to.
Yeah.
Like as you learn, right? It's not things that are brought up. We don't really learn about emotions. Basic happy, sad, like when you're in preschool, but it's not something that continues on as you grow up unless you go into psychology and whatever. But I just think those are things that I'm really glad that we mentioned because I want people to remember those three things because I think they're important. And I think when we self-analyze ourselves, we can start questioning, do I feel emotions? Well, how do I feel the emotion? Things like that. It's a sensation. I think so many people that are triggered, and this is something from experience. When I feel triggered, there are certain kinds of sensations I don't want, right? Like I know that about myself, but now I'm aware enough to where I challenge myself to take the sensation, even though I don't want it, because I know it's something that I've just pushed. So again, it's becoming aware and recognizing and curious. So I want people to walk away being curious. Like I want them to, again, this is all about self-discovery. And when we can show up as our best selves, we are healthier. And then we can be that example for our families and, our community. That we are doing things differently because we know more. And so it's not about we want to become a better version of ourselves. So then that way we can express that out to the world, because the more that we can do that, it's a ripple effect, and people will catch on to it, and people will want, like, hey, what is she doing? Like, what does she have what's going on here? And I just think, again, emotions are something that, a lot of us were taught to suppress at a very young age, which I think is different from the kids today. Not all of them, but I think today we've kind of gone polar opposite, where we want to like talk about everyone's emotions, and we're over exaggerating it because we didn't have it. So I always think it's really interesting, like you said at the very beginning, how you were really fascinated with the world and the people and the different times of life and challenges and things. I just think you can see generationally, how our parents grew up, then they did different for us. It's like we just keep going extreme to extreme. And so it's like we need some kind of like level balance. And I think we're getting there. But I don't know what'll happen, next. But I just think we're kind of at that pendulum swinging again. So, but I think somatics is something that's newer or being talked about a little bit more in this newer space. And I think it's a modality and tool that can help to kind of balance and center, the extremes. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, I really feel like somatics is at the root of everything because we can weave it in through
Mm,
like day-to-day life. So yes, emotions, like how do we get back in touch with our emotions again? And as you're saying, like we really experience them for 90 seconds and the wisdom, because emotions are information for us.
mm,
If we learn how to be in relationship with those emotions, they'll tell us things about ourselves, about the environments that we're putting ourselves in, about relationships with other people, relationships to our work, where we need to set boundaries. Like there's so much information that's in our experience. And so somatics helps us just start to, like you're naming, curiosity, getting curious about what is happening, what is my experience, and practicing the way that we want to be showing up is one really powerful component of somatic. So in the somatic work that I do with people, not only do we do things like healing past traumatic experiences with different releasing methods, but also like practicing how we want to show up, not under pressure, so that when we are under pressure, we have a somatic memory of how, like, oh, this is an option for me. I can be more choiceful in how I show up
mm,
in day-to-day life. And so I like to think of three kind of branches of somatic practices. And one of them is that when we think about the nervous system as safety and survival, then we look at our basic survival needs. And so every time that we care for the basic survival needs, eating, sleeping, our home, like the clutter in our home, the cleanliness of our home, all of that contributes to your nervous system perceiving safety, danger, or life threat.
mm,
So if we're dehydrated, that's a stressor.
mm,
Your nervous system is going to send alarm bells going, girl, get yourself some water.
mm,
You need to hydrate, right? So it's I like to incorporate those as well. Sleep, if we're not getting really good sleep, if we've got blue lights on or overhead lights on at night, that is one thing. I mean, if you talk about all of the different somatic practices, I could probably give you 100 in a day, because there is this wider lens of every time I care for those basic survival needs, then I'm caring for the health and the harmony of my nervous system,
mm,
because your nervous system is perceiving things in your inner environment, your outer environment, and your relational environment, all without your conscious awareness. And then deciding, do I need to defend myself, or can I be in connection? Am I
mm.
safe, or am I in danger?
I love that. And I really love how you brought up the sleeping aspect, because again, for so long, I just don't think it was brought to people as a really important component of health and wellness, but it is the
Yeah.
most important. And when we are moms, or we are in midlife, or we are in these different challenges of life where we're not sleeping our best, When you're a new mom, you go into sleep deprivation and you just deal with
Yeah.
it because your baby's getting up, and you're usually at a, more a little bit younger age, but I can tell you from that time to like where I am now, when I have disturbed sleep now in my midlife, I'm like, how did I ever do that? Luckily my body was a little bit more resilient back then, but it's really interesting to be able to see the difference of how it wrecks myself now versus
Yeah.
before. It probably was, but I just was in, like a trance mode. Because, sometimes you do have to do that when you have a baby. But now I don't have a baby and I'm like, whoa, I can't, like sleep has to be a priority. But I really loved how you mentioned the blue light and things like that. Because again, when you and I grew up, which I know I'm a lot older than you, but when we didn't even have those things to think about, right? Like it wasn't even something that had to be like thought about in like, oh, should I have that? Shouldn't I have that? But, I always recommend to every client I work with and anybody who will listen, your phone shouldn't be anywhere near your head. Like you shouldn't have, people are like, well, I use it as my alarm clock. It's like, it's $10 to go get an alarm clock, or put your phone in your bathroom, set the alarm, and then you'll have to get out of bed physically to go shut it off. But you don't have to have it next to your head, and it's not good for you. And then the lights that are emitted off of all of that is disturbing you, even though you don't even know it. It is disturbing your sleep patterns while you're trying to sleep. And sleep is the place where you rest and digest and repair and heal and all of the things. So if I love that you brought that up, because again, it's not just, there isn't just one thing you're going to walk away with today that's going to change everything. It has to be a little bit everywhere. You got to sprinkle it out and do the 1%. I talk about 1% shifts because you've got to be able to not expect 100% all the time in every aspect, but just doing those little 1% will add up over time, and it won't feel like such a chore, to have good sleep and to have good hydration and things like that.
Yeah. Yeah. I always like to share with my clients is that not one thing makes us sick. And when we talk about sick,
Mm,
we talk about dis-ease. Where
yes.
is the body, mind, energy out of harmony? It's in disharmony, discordance. Not one thing puts you there, and not one thing is going to bring you back into harmony. So it's really about finding exactly the 1% that resonate with you, that feel helpful for you. And just like the practices that you share all the time, same with somatics, is that you're going to find stuff that feels really helpful, and then stuff you're like, oh God, I didn't like that at all. Totally fine. Leave it.
Right. Right. And I often say with that though, come back and revisit it. If something that doesn't
Yeah.
feel right today in 6 months, it just might mean that you're not ready for it now, but that doesn't mean in 6 months you might not be. So always revisit things that don't
Yeah.
feel comfortable today down the line somewhere. But when we
Absolutely.
do things that feel good, when we do things that you notice make a difference, we're more apt to keep doing them. And that's really the goal in healing and health and wellness. I really love this modality. I'm, super fascinated by the the more we gain wisdom in this, and we figure out that we do have the ability and we are empowered to recognize and take different steps and use different tools that maybe we've never used before. I feel like when we get into that mode of feeling empowered, like, oh, I'm trying something new and it feels right, again, it's an expansion of who you are as a person. And I think that's a beautiful thing. So that's why like somatics for me has been a big thing, over the last couple of years that I've been curious and interested in learning about, because I see a lot of benefits from it. Personally, as you are growing into your own, whatever that looks like for you, better version.
Yeah. Yes,
Yeah. I
absolutely.
love it.
Because most of what we don't like about ourselves is a
Mm,
survival strategy.
I love that.
We like anxiety, for example. The way that we label anxiety is just a collection of physiological symptoms or experiences that we cluster together. And if you meet three, four, five of them, then you get a label or a diagnosis of anxiety. But for example, the racing heart or the muscle tension or the foot tapping or the nail biting, all of this is energy trying to move, trying to run, or trying to fight back. And we can look at this across the board is that the things that we, whether it's and I'll take a step back here for a moment, is that when we think about stress, so many of us are familiar with the sympathetic or the fight or flight as a survival strategy or as a response. But there's also another one that is called our shutdown state or the dorsal vagal complex of the vagus nerve. And so we don't really recognize that, like, oh, wait, depression is a survival strategy. Feeling numb and hopeless and helpless is a survival strategy.
Mhm.
And so as you named earlier of like, oh, can I even connect to my emotions? That is actually a way of protecting us, evolutionarily speaking. For example, if you were, let's go back to this lion example. We see a lion or a threat in the wild, and we are with people, totally different outcome than if we're alone. So
Mhm.
the first place that we go as a survival strategy is the social engagement system or ventral vagal. Because if there's 20 of you, that tiger's not going to bother you. So that's the first place. Second place we go is, okay, I can run away or I can fight back. So the sympathetic, the fight or flight. If that doesn't work, if we run, but the tiger gets us, or if we decide to fight and it tears an arm off, then we drop down into shutdown, where the body gets flooded with endogenous opioids. So opioids that are naturally occurring and that are made in the body flood the system so that we shut down, so that we can't feel the extent of what's happened to us. So we don't
That's
often think
interesting.
about that as being a survival strategy, but I think that totally changes the game to recognize that, oh, that's just my nervous system really telling me that I am overwhelmed by stress and I need some help.
Yeah, I love
And
that.
then the taking it all a step further is when we can recognize that these are survival strategies, it makes us less bad
Mm,
because it's not so personal anymore. It is a universal experience. So it's not that, oh, I'm angry or I'm impatient or I'm anxious or I can't focus on anything or my energy is drained by the end of the day. It's not about you. It's not something that you're doing wrong, except for the fact that nobody ever taught you to heal stress and harmonize your nervous system.
right. I love that. I want to, because you're talking about the bear situation, the tiger, the lion, that thing.
Yeah.
So I
Yeah.
have to tell you this funny story because we live in a neighborhood where we have a lot of black bears. And the other day, we were getting in the car early in the morning to go somewhere, and it was dark out. And so usually I'm very aware, we all are, we open the garage, we look, and I don't know, I was just busy and rushing. And my husband has a truck, so I turned the lights on the truck, and, thinking whatever, we'll run away. It didn't even cross my mind, to be honest. It was just not in my like thoughts that morning. And I had something in my hand and I walked out and I was walking towards the truck and I heard something and I literally look up and there's a black bear at the end, not like on the side of the driveway. And my reaction, I said, "Get out of here." Like it's gonna hear me, right? But literally it turned around and started walking towards my neighbor. So I didn't feel that like, or that influx of like the fight or flight, right? So I was like, okay,
Mhm.
this is okay. He's walking away. I'm good. So I start walking towards the truck and I'm looking and he's looking at me and I said, keep going. And then he ended up kind of like moseying down the driveway. And then I'm getting into the truck to put something down and I heard something else. And because I couldn't see it, my
Yeah.
body like instinctually went into this like flare up of like crazy fight or flight. I really just
Yeah.
dropped everything and ran back to the garage and ran in the house. And then I sat there and I started laughing because I'm like, the two different like little things were so like my body response was so significantly different. And
Yeah.
it was like you were saying, if I'm with 20 people, I feel safer. And not that I felt safer, but like looking at him, I was like, if I run, he's probably going to chase me. That's what I thought. So I was like, I'm just going to tell him to get away, like he's going to listen to me. But it was just like no
Yeah.
feeling of craziness came over. But then when I heard something and couldn't see, it was just like this like this just well up of like run for your life or you might get killed. So I just had to share that because it was just funny because it's when you become more in tune with your body, you can recognize when you go into fight or flight. And I think that's super important. At least it was for me to recognize when I am triggered. I call it a trigger, but when I'm triggered and I go into that fight or flight, And,
Yeah.
with scenarios that I deal with on a daily basis from being a caregiver for my mom, I do find myself still bouncing into that trigger mode. And then I'm like, okay, Robin, you know better than that. Like, let's stop, pause, and let's like regroup and figure out, why are we letting this person like wreck your health? It's not worth it. Like, they're not losing sleep over you. So I go through like this whole conversation that I have with myself to bring myself back to a place. Um, and it is constant work. That's what the whole point of me saying all this is. It's constant work, but I do it because I love my health and I love myself and I want to be here for the future of my children and my grandkids. And I don't want to end up, you know, being in a place where if I could all help it, get dementia and things like that. So that is why I do. And I remind myself of that daily. So again, I just, that was my whole point in telling you that story, but I thought it was just appropriate because you were talking about the bear.
Yeah.
Okay. So as we're kind of wrapping up, I think people have a better understanding of somatics. I loved your 4 pillars. I think that they're really tangible and things for people to think about. And if any of it resonates with you, in the show notes, I'm going to put all of Stephanie's, her website, her social media handle, because I think that as you're dipping into something new, it is good to follow somebody who has wisdom and experience so that you can see if it's something that feels right for you. And then if it is, obviously, where she's at and you can find her. And I think it's important that we start to get curious and come from a different lens of, it's not going to heal everything, but it heals the parts that need healing to then be able to expand out a little bit into other parts of your life. All right. So as we wrap up, we always ask the same question to every guest because I think it's super important. What are some non-negotiables you've created in your life so that you can have your best health and wellness as you're navigating in your current situation of being a somatic practitioner?
Yeah. Okay, there's so many, so I'm going to try and narrow it.
Yeah, fine. The reason I ask this is because I think that the listeners listen to people's non-negotiables, get curious about them, and sometimes try them on and they work for them.
Totally. Yeah. Yeah. I'll start like just in chronological order of my day is I always get outside and get sunshine before screen time. Non-negotiable.
Oh,
Sunshine before screen time. And that could even be 5 minutes, or if it's cloudy outside, 10 to 15 minutes of low angle sun first thing in the morning. So sometimes I go on a walk, sometimes I'm drinking tea barefoot in my backyard, whatever it is, sunshine before screen time. Another big one is I always take this is very uncommon, I feel like, but I always take 3 days off of work and all obligations during the first 3 days of my bleed every month.
okay.
And I have an awesome partner who totally supports that. And so he ramps up, he cooks during those days. He does all the stuff with the dogs in the home and like really tends to me when I'm in those couple of days. And sometimes it's just one. I try and aim for 3 days where I'm just doing less. I don't take appointments. I don't see any clients in those days. I'm not starting any new projects. I'm not launching it. Like nothing that doesn't have to get done, I'm not doing. And that's been a
Can you
non-negotiable for me.
explain why you do that? Because I think that's
Yeah.
intriguing, but very important.
Yes, women have 2 cycles where men only have one. Men have the circadian cycle of a 24-hour day. So their energy, creativity, all of that is the same day in, day out over the course of years. Women, we also have an infradian rhythm that changes in that 28-day span. And so our nervous system, our endocrine system, the hormones, and our immune system are very intricately connected. And so anything to support your immune system or your endocrine system supports your nervous system. And same, the nervous system will support those systems. Everything is connected. So but it's particularly closely connected for those. So taking care of my hormones, honoring my infradian rhythm because I'm a woman with a 28-day cycle. Those are the days when I have the lowest energy, the lowest creativity, and I just don't push myself in those times. And then when I am closer to ovulation, I have way more energy and I know that I'm going to be creating and playing with friends and doing a bunch of stuff. And so I allow for that natural cycle. So that's a really big thing that I do as
I want to
well.
pause just for 1 second before you go on with your
Yeah.
non-negotiables, because I have two girls, and I was never taught about cycle rhythms or anything like that, and cycle seating and like all of the things. And
Yeah.
it's something that I really didn't learn probably in the last 10 years, how important it is. And so, my kids are now old enough, they are kind of on their own adventure, but I've encouraged them to read some of the stuff because it's valid, it's true, and nobody teaches us this stuff. As women, we're just thrown to the wolves. And I just feel like if in middle school, when you start your period, or high school, or whatever, it's like if you knew that stuff and you could start honoring your body that early, that would be so much better than waiting until you're 30, 40, 50 years old to figure it out. But so if you're listening and you have younger kids and you're a mom that didn't dip into that, I highly recommend reading some resources and books and listening to some people before or during, while your child, starts getting their period and things like that, because I think it's a big thing that we miss out on, for our health and wellness for our kids and for ourselves. But
Yeah.
that leads into like menopause and all of the other stuff. But that could be a whole other episode, which we'll totally do one day. All right. So that's your second non-negotiable. And I love it. I'm glad. Thank you for sharing that too.
Yeah. Yeah. Gosh. And then sleep is another really big non-negotiable. So I'm not on any screens right before bed. I have blue light blocking glasses, both in daylight tint. That's great for, at 2 p.m. or 3 p.m. If I've just been on the computer all day, I'll pop those on for a couple hours in the afternoon. And then if I do have to do work at night, I have my red light glasses on. I have no overhead lights on at night, and I have them usually all on during the day. And people are like, what are you doing? I'm like, no, we mimic outside, inside. So if the sun is out, then the lights are on inside. If the sun is down, there are no lights in my house unless they are candles or low light. So like wall things. I think I have a wall thing here. Table lamps, things like that. I love a somatic practice at night that is either like legs up the wall or a different breathing exercise, like one somatic practice at night to trigger my system that like, oh, it's time to wind down now. So whatever that one practice is, can
Can
be a
you
really
talk briefly
supportive
about
way.
the wall, the legs up on the wall? Because I know a lot of people see videos and things on that, but I would love to educate them on why that is a practice and what it does.
Yeah. So that one is great for a lot of different things, including your lymphatic system, your circulatory system. And again, if you support all of these other systems, you're supporting your nervous system. But you are, in essence, circulating the blood, but it helps to put you in a parasympathetic state by really giving your nervous system a moment of deep relaxation rather quickly.
Mm.
So sometimes it takes a really long time for us to like relax, but 5 minutes with the legs up the wall, your nervous system will feel a drastic difference. And as we talked about earlier, the goal isn't about being calm, it's to be flexible. So practicing rest as a skill, remembering that rest is a skill is really important. So that when we are going to bed, we have that experience of like, oh, I know how to get there. I
Mm.
know how to get myself to a place of rest and relaxation, preparing myself for a restorative night's sleep. So that's a great practice to do that. Practice rest is legs up the wall. You can do it during the day. You can do it to transition from work or like after dinner into a nighttime routine, or you could do it literally as you're laying on the bed with your feet up the wall and then turning around and then laying down and going to sleep. But with all practices, repetition is required to rewire your body, mind, and energy. So, as you name, like 1%, it's the consistency of it that's gonna move the needle.
Absolutely.
But so many different practices for sleep is a non-negotiable for me. And I think the last one I'll name, because there's a lot of buckets inside each of these, is that every spring, So the natural new year, I don't do this in January 1 in the dead of winter when we're all hibernating and like depleted and restoring our energy. But I do this just before the spring and the awakening of energy and aliveness and the creation of life again, is I create a declaration that anchors me for the whole year. And so based on that declaration, there are practices inside of it that help me embody that version that has the thing I want. And so there's a few different practices inside of what my declaration is. And so I do those daily. And there's usually, I usually do about 2 or 3, and they each take anywhere from 2 minutes to 5 or 6 minutes. And
I love
sometimes they
that.
rotate because there's so many inside of them, but I'll usually do them for a few months until I'm like, yeah, I am that person. I don't even have to try anymore. That's just who I am now.
Right. And I love that you just said that because, again, when you are expanding yourself, when you are thriving in a different way, it does take practice. And that time, there's no like definitive time. So it could be a couple of months, it could be 6 months. It depends on, and again, when you do this year after year after year, some of those things come quicker because you're just naturally, training yourself. Oh, this is where we're going again. We're going to something new, So I just think, again, it is that consistency. It is the practice. But I really love that you do that in spring because I know everybody makes their January resolutions. And it's interesting because it is the time of the dead winter when you are like snuggly and you don't want to, it's going to the gym when it's freezing cold, like all of the things that it's one reason why I feel like a lot of times things don't stick because you're doing it at the wrong time of the year. Not that you can't do it during that time, but to start something brand new when it's dark at 4 o'clock and like your rhythm, your whole body rhythm is hibernation time, So it's interesting that you do that. I love that. It's definitely something that I'll consider this coming spring when instead of I kind of do it all year long. I feel like it's an ongoing thing. I don't feel like I just do it in January. I just feel like I do something when I attain it, then I do the next, and things like, so I guess it's similar but different. But I like the spring idea when everything's blooming, your energy is different and things like that. So thank you so much for sharing your non-negotiables. I know today was a lot as you guys walk away, but my hope is and my desire for this podcast is that every week when you walk away, you're walking away with some wisdom that you did not come with. You're walking away with tangible things that you can try on and see how they feel as you're growing in your wellness journey, because this is your journey. It's not my journey. It's not Stephanie's journey. And what works for Stephanie may or may not work for you. Same with me. And it is about having that curious lens to try on things, to experiment with, and to see what feels right for you and to you, during this particular time of life. So again, as you walk away and you start trying some of these things on, reply, in the little comment section of the podcast, but also reach out, DM me or Stephanie, because we like to hear from people to see what resonates and what works. It makes our jobs more joyful. Because when we see people transforming, we see people trying these things on and, finding success, it is fulfilling. At least, I believe it's the same for Stephanie, but it definitely is for me. So again, thank you so much for coming on, Stephanie, and sharing your wisdom and experience. I will see you next week. Thanks again, Stephanie.
Thank you so much.
Wow, y'all. Wasn't that just so grounding? I love the way that Stephanie brings science, compassion, and embodiment together in such a simple, doable way. If today's conversation resonated with you at all, please go check out the Stress Healers at thestressshealers.com and follow Stephanie on Instagram at the.stress.healers. And as always, if this episode spoke to your heart, share it with a mama who might need a reminder to slow down, to breathe, and to come back home to themselves. I would love for you, if you haven't already, to like the podcast, to put a review in, something that will help to generate more people being able to be connected to the podcast. And until next time, take care of your beautiful mind, your body, and your spirit, and keep showing up for yourself one gentle step at a time. That episode had so many great takeaways. I hope you feel inspired and more empowered to make small 1% shifts on your wellness journey this week. I'd love to hear what resonated with you. If you want to leave a review, share your thoughts, and let me know how you're going to be implementing these 1% shifts into your life. And don't forget to subscribe and share this episode with another mama who could use a little wellness love. Want to stay connected? Join me on Instagram and Facebook at Live Life Balanced with Robin. Check out my website at livelifebalancedwithrobin.com for more resources and grab yourself some freebies while you're there. Until next time, I hope you find peace, love, and light by breathing, being present, and allowing for all possibilities to come your way. See y'all next week. Love to y'all.